So again, these are the resources that we used for this class. Everyone has seen them, so I certainly don't need to review those resources, but I like you all to know that that's where they are, so you can certainly reference those. Today, we actually are I don't know why I always speak in plural. I'm going to actually reference this particular book that I had mentioned before. So it's got a lot of great questions in there, great family questions. They're super easy read. If you want it more of like a to-do type thing, like I need more of like a template because I feel a little paralyzed or stumped or I'm not sure like where to go with this. This is like a really great book for that. The other book, The Art of Neighboring, you all have seen. Amazon has both of them. They're not very expensive, but obviously if I'm reading them, they're both easy reads. So there we go. So when was the last time you all tried something new? I think as we get to be adults, like those can be kind of few and far between because we kind of like to stay in how we feel, you know, like, oh, this is what I do every day. But name something that you all did that was new. Okay. That is so hard. It is terrifying to me to think of that. At this age, I'm just like, am I too old to do that? That is really hard. And exhausting. You go home so hungry every day because your mind is just working so much. So yeah, that one's hard. Yeah, you do. You really do, because you're just like everything, all systems are firing. So my mom has this thing where she likes to sign me up for things. It drives me nuts. And she's like, well, I've already bought the tickets. There's no refund. And so do you do that, Kelly?
Not at all. Yeah. Yes. They're so blessed they have jobs because of me.
Very true. Right. But, you know, like my mom's like, I think you need to go zip lining. Okay. Right. You know, she will sign me up for kayaking trips, ropes course, like zip lining, whatever it is. It's like she wants to just constantly push me out of my comfort zone. And I also think, gosh, like that is so sweet that, you know, even though my mom is super old, she's not here, I'm going to say that about her as revenge. She's not. You know, I do think it's sweet that she still is like, she doesn't want me to be, you know, comfortable with being comfortable. And that can really happen where you just get to a certain age. I'm in my 50s, and you just get to a certain age where it's just like, this feels comfortable. You know, this is my daily routine, and these are the things I like, and these are the things I don't like. But when you really start to try something new, whether it's a new job or zip lining or whatever it is, you have to rely on someone else and their knowledge on how do I do this? And you have to be more vulnerable than you would normally be because you're saying, I need your help with this, whatever it is. So one way that it can go wrong when you are trying something new or perhaps even reaching out to say, oh, here, I need your help with something, is you can be vulnerable in a certain way, like let's just say aging. And you could be talking to someone and you could be like, wow, these wrinkles have come in strong after menopause. You know, like you could just be having like a real conversation with someone and then you get a DM that says, by the way, I sell wrinkle cream. And you're just like, oh, that's not what I was doing there. And so you know now that they're trying to sell you something, and it might be something that they could help you with, but we have to be careful that we're not trying to sell Jesus or the gospel or something to somebody in that way. We're just trying to love people better. And even if there are things or services or whatever that maybe we do sell, sliding into someone's DMs is not really recommended, especially if you don't really know someone. The amount of direct messages that I get about people trying to sell me something that they're selling is wildly discouraging because I'm like, I'm not sure that you know who I am if I was in a lineup of two. And so it's weird that you would send this to me to do that. And so you all know what that feels like to have someone sell you something. And so it's not like you just want to go into your neighbor's life trying to sell something to them. Like, Jesus, come to our church, our vacation, whatever it is. You're just doing this out of love, and people start to receive it as that. So let's read from 1 Kings 17. We're going to read 8 through 16. I'm going to fiddle with my hair a lot because I'm trying to keep it out of the microphone. So I was going to wear a dress, and then I realized I didn't have a place to put the microphone, and so I had to change very last second, and I should have pulled my hair back. So this is on me. This is my fault. So the dress was amazing, by the way. Yeah. Yeah. So 1 Kings 17. 8 through 16. Oh, Faith, right, you were going to read it. Yeah. Then the word of the Lord came to him, "Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food." So he went to Zarephath, where when he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and said, "Would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink?" As she was going to get it, he called, "And bring me, please, a piece of bread, as surely as the Lord your God lives." She replied, "I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said, but first make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me. And then make something for yourself and for your son. For this is what the Lord of God Israel says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day of the Lord sends rain on the land." She went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. Now, we obviously know this story goes on. It doesn't end right there. I mean, the very next portion talks about how the widow comes back with an accusation, how there's conflict, how there's trauma, obviously, in that situation. And then there's acceptance. We're seeing in this, there's life and death. Like, there's so much, like, in these little verses. So it certainly doesn't end there. But what we want to do is ask, well, why didn't God just provide for Elisha directly? Like, we know previously that he did. Like, why is he making him go to a widow? You could see how he meets needs even when there's very little to offer. We have no insight to really what Elijah was thinking, but we do see his immediate obedience. Like, he just was like, the Lord's directed me to do this, I'm going to go do it. But how do you think that the widow felt when he came? She probably was like, I just told you we were going to die. We were like, you're asking me these things, like, I have nothing. I'm a widow. And then you can go, well, how do you think Elijah felt when he had to go ask her? Like, if you're looking at it from both perspectives of the giving and the asking, there probably were a lot of emotions in that. Was there trust? Was there faith? Was there pride? Was there, oh, I know better. Oh, you shouldn't tell me to go do that. I can see that person doesn't have enough. And I think that sometimes we can get into that, oh, I shouldn't go ask somebody for something. Oh, they're too busy, or, perhaps they don't have enough of something, or whatever it is. So we can see here that there was obedience, and that's what we're supposed to do. If we go down to verse 14, for this is what the Lord God of Israel says. There had to be such a high level of desperation from this woman. She was a widow. She was a Gentile. She was willing to give something no matter how little she had. At Elijah's first request, she was willing to bring him water. And then we see that he's asking for some bread. And she's saying, I really don't have anything. I'm going to take this home and I'm going to make this for me and my son. But what we're seeing is she was still willing to give something, but she's saying, I don't know if I have enough faith to give you more. Do I have enough faith to give you more? Let me explain that to you. So we see that in there. It would be difficult for both of these people to make sense in the moment. But because of this, like the lack on both sides, this person needs something to eat and drink. This person has something, barely enough, if any, to meet that need. But what we see is they both get to know more of who God is in this lack. They get to see how God is providing. We see in a few verses before this, Elijah was being fed meat and bread by ravens and drinking out of a brook. Then we read in verse 7, sometime later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. God provided for him day and night. God told him where to go and that he made provisions for him. And Elijah, the rain, there was no dew. Like not even dew. Like how many times do you go out, especially in the summer, and you go out and you're like, well, I probably won't be able to mow till 10 because that grass needs to dry. Like you do like all that like do math and figure out like when you can, there was nothing. Like can you imagine how dry and arid that must have been? When Elijah asked the widow, he was using the faith he had in God, not in her to provide. He was saying, God's provided for me up until this point. If he's telling me to do this, I'm going to go do it. Receiving something is harder than earning it. I don't recommend going on Reddit a lot because it can be the Wild West. And I don't know if you all have ever gone onto Reddit to read a review about something, but sometimes the language really can be the Wild West, but sometimes it can be wildly helpful when you're looking something up. And so I went in there and I was looking up just like, what do people say about neighboring and receiving a gift? And, you know, I honestly didn't think anything was going to come up. I was wrong. Yeah, so, I mean, they're like everything's, like Reddit has everything. So this person received a gift from a neighbor and they were just so dumbfounded that they got something. They were like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I don't have anything for this person. And so they were like, nothing is expected beyond a thank you. They had, they gave them vegetables. They had a ton of extra vegetables they grew, and rather than let it go to waste, they decided to share. If you ever have something extra, pass it along. Nothing is required in return. This next person, just say thank you. You're overthinking it. They likely had extra produce from their harvest and didn't want it to go to waste. This person says, in a few months when it snows and the end of their driveway gets a little bit icy, offer to go shovel it for them. This next person, you can't go wrong with just saying thank you. This next person, thanks, in an ongoing friendly relationship. Neighbors help each other out in good neighborhoods, but it's not debt exchange. It's not that type of thing. It's a relationship. And I was like, oh. And do what? I know, and it's good again. And then it's not. Right. But it can be so hard for us to really accept something from someone. It can insult our pride, and it's kind of ingrained in our desire to be self-reliant, and we don't like that. Like, even hearing that it insults our pride probably made some of you all feel like, that's not my issue. Well, it is, if that was like your go-to. It can certainly be mine. It is so hard to receive something from someone, especially when you don't have something to give back. You're just like, I don't even know how to say thank you. I don't even know, where do I find these words, or why did I deserve this? It requires trust. It requires humility. It often just requires some imagination. And that probably sounds weird, but you're like, they gave this to me for X reason. And the way you respond is wildly meaningful to that person. And it might just be saying thank you, and it ends there. but it certainly could open it up to become a relationship. And so when you all are doing something for your neighbor, asking them to help you with something or to borrow something or whatever, it gives the opportunity for relationship to develop. And no one wants to feel like a project. And by allowing them to step in, you're not doing that. Pat, I just saw you back there. My heart just swelled. Hey. Pat has always been such an encouragement. Like, I want to say that I think it was like the first time that I was teaching, and I'm a terrified public speaker. I have full torso sweating right now. The first time I was teaching, Dave and her caught me in the hallway, and I felt like I was jumping out of my skin. And Pat grabbed a hold of my hands and immediately said, she didn't even pause. She goes, let's pray. Just immediately broke into prayer in that moment. And it has stuck with, she didn't say, I will pray for you. She didn't say, oh, you've been in my prayers. Not that those things are wrong, but she just immediately grabbed my hands and went to the Lord in prayer. And it meant so much to me. And I think of that all the time. And every time before, like I stand up here, I think of the sweetness that was in that. And so sometimes even when you're reaching out to your neighbor, if they share something, what a great way to share your faith. It's not like I'm going to go home and privately pray. You just immediately break into that. That really lets them know, like, hey, I'm a Christian. I'm serious about this. I want you to hear how I can speak to the Lord in prayer and how you can speak to the Lord in prayer. So that was a total side note. So sorry. Back on track. Yeah. So, but like I said, for Christians to receive the kingdom of God, there has to be a lifelong receiving of God's gift and a lifelong awareness that we need that gift. It's not a mandatory acceptance. And then all of a sudden you just have eternal joy. It's not that. I think everyone's sitting in this room that it's not like you accepted Christ at whatever age, and from that point forward, your life's just been like unicorns and balloons and, like hearts. Like, it's not been that way at all. But when we accept it, it is a daily refusal to trade one kingdom for another. We are not taking the world. We are taking what He promises us. So we are laying that down. Only as we see ourselves rightly can we depend rightly upon God as the giver. So learning to trust in God completely will help us follow through on His leading and the instructions in our lives. When we go to God with big stuff, we normally feel like completely helpless. Like, oh, there's this tremendous sickness. Someone has passed away. There's something that's really traumatic that's going on. And it is so easy to go to Him with all of those really big things. Wouldn't you agree? And it just feels like it just pours out of you, that you just go to Him because you feel totally dependent on Him. I can't do this. I need you. And that's the only way that you see out of it. But when it comes to like the really small stuff, are you going to Him with that total dependence? Like, are you saying, I trust you about stuff about the hospital, but I don't trust you with going next door to talk to my neighbor? And we do need to have that total dependence on Him and trust that He's going to use it in whatever way that He feels fit. Last week we talked about fear factor. And, we talked about someone mentioned that their next door neighbor had a different religion than them. And it's a religion that probably a lot of us don't know a lot of the details about. Someone mentioned that they have a fear of rejection. And that's real, just like in everyday life, but also with your neighbors. I mentioned I have a fear of sharks. And so... that doesn't come into play as much as rejection, but, the point is like fear can really be crippling, but also paralyzing. And you really are allowing your emotions and your feelings to be at the forefront instead of just trusting God with what He can do. But rejection has a real sting, and we just need to let our faith triumph over fear. So Hebrews 11:1, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So you don't know what God's going to do in that situation of you walking next door or down the road or across the street or whatever your situation is. So what are your neighbors knowledgeable or passionate about? I think sometimes like you can really see that. Like that's not a secret. Like if you see a big pontoon boat, well then you'll go, oh, they normally like to go to the lake or something like that. I see them leaving on the weekend. That's going to give you a clue as a conversation starter. You might see someone with an extraordinarily beautiful yard or particular flowers or hostas. My mom and I went to go see Michael York and Sarah and Henry on Friday. And Sarah is starting to get into gardening, and she has gone to her neighbor for some insight, but she also planted some hostas in her front yard, and she calls them Jimmy Hostas instead of Jimmy Hoffa. And right. And her being out in that front yard in front of her fence has allowed her the opportunity to talk to her neighbor across the street, because while she's out, they kind of come and go a lot, and she's able to have that conversation with them and just talk about the flowers or the gardening or whatever's next. She also has another neighbor that has a bird that talks to her a lot, so I love that. And it's like he'll be over on like his little porch, he'll be like, hello. So maybe everyone just needs to get a bird as a conversation starter. So yeah. But look at what they're passionate about. How could you enter into like those skills or those interests and allow your neighbor to serve you? Now, obviously, that doesn't mean that you're going to walk over and you're going to be like, I'm in a need for you to come over and take care of my flowers. That's not what I'm talking about. But you can go over and just be like, your garden is incredible. Like, what do you put on your tomatoes? Or, you know, I've tried to grow tomatoes and this isn't something that's working. Could you come look at my soil? I mean, it's amazing. People that are really, I'm not good at gardening, but people that are amazing at gardening, the things that they know, and how they could help you. You might know of someone that can sew really well, and you're like, all I want to do is learn how to, hem a pair of pants. And, a lot of older people know that skill out of necessity. And so maybe it's even just going over there and being silly and being like, do you know how to sew? I'm trying to learn how to sew this particular thing and I'm just stuck. Even if they say no, so what? So what, Joel? Like, so what? Then you just start that conversation with them and just be like, kind of, well, now while I'm here, you just start chatting about something. It can be a good conversation starter. So in disaster relief, people are really in a position of desperation, just absolute trauma where they've pretty much lost everything and they're in shock. And they still want to serve you because you've come in from whatever distance and you're coming in, you're touching all of their belongings. They don't know you. I mean, what if someone came into your flooded home and touched all of your belongings and you've never met them before and you don't really know them? It's like they want to do something so that they feel this is more of a relationship than just whatever. Now, obviously, not everyone has a situation like, a big flood that they could, go in and help their neighbor. But you do have everyday situations where you could go in and help someone. But one of the people while we were there, she went to then go live with her son, and she made a honey bun cake and sweet tea. And I had never had honey bun cake. I highly recommend it. But it was in Texas, and the temperature without the heat index was 103. And she made honey bun cake and sweet tea. And I told Daniel, I was like, I'm going to eat this, but I'm going to need to go to the emergency department when I'm done. Because have y'all tried to eat something real sweet when it's hot? I mean, it's like your pancreas is like, we're not doing this. And right. But I was like, there was no way I was going to say no, because it was her way of giving back, leveling that playing field, just being like, I need to do something to help. Again, we don't ever want someone to feel like a project. We just want to love them. And what does that look like where it's more of a give and take relationship? Like, who in here, I mean, I look at everyone that's in here, and I think almost every single person that's in here gave to either Natalie or my Zimbabwe friends. Who in here would say that it is easy to give? I mean, it is, if someone tells you of a need, like, you're on it. Like, you all are amazing. But who in here would say it is so hard to receive? I mean, for me, it's very challenging to just be like, oh, even embarrassing that you're just like, oh gosh, why am I embarrassed right now that someone is trying to help me? And that is so wonderful that they've come in, and then you're like, oh, that's just ugly pride that's rearing its head, or my ego, or whatever it is. And so sometimes, like, in that joy to give, you have to remember what that may feel like to receive, and receive a lot from a lot of different directions, and already kind of have that conversation ready, so that when you are perhaps meeting a need or wanting to give something even as simple as vegetables to your neighbor, like, make a joke and say, now I'm going to give these to you, but here's what we need to do in the future. You're going to have to come over and help me with these flowers sometime. Or your yard looks amazing. Or say something so that it doesn't feel like they're just constantly going to be on that receiving end, because that can feel really uncomfortable. So we need to not steal a person's dignity and force them to always be in that position of need and never receive help from them. We should try to maintain that balance as much as possible. And if we're always the one in power, we need to make sure that we're kind of the one that's asking them for help in ways that we can do that. Communitas is the Latin word, and it comes, community comes from the Latin word communitas. I've butchered that word, I'm sure, which means spirit of community. So how are you doing that? Not just with Buck Run people in a community group, but how are you doing that in your neighborhood or where you live with your neighbors? Are you creating a sense of community around your house? It's difficult to describe that word of communitas, even when one's in the middle of experiencing it, because it's a sense felt by the plurality of people without boundaries. It's the pleasure of a group sharing common experiences, and fellowship can emerge anywhere. It doesn't overwhelm but enhance communal delight. It's also used to distinguish social relationships from an area of common living. So how do we do that? How do we develop that in our homes, where we're like, we want to develop this outside of just our community groups of Buck Run people coming into our house? And it's going to come down to a few different areas. So you're going to, one way how to build that connectedness with your neighbors in your neighborhood is connection. That connection, again, it starts out all the way from the beginning, week one, of just being like, hey neighbor, I know I've lived next to you for 10 years. We've never exchanged names. I'm Jennifer. I feel like an idiot that I've never told you my name. I want to know yours. I mean, you can just be humble and just go over there, and it really is that simple. It doesn't have to be super complicated. You could even just find something in common. When you're walking over there, you could just be like, we've lived in this neighborhood so long. There's so many changes that have come since we've lived here. Have you noticed all the traffic that's driving on the street now, or they're widening it, or whatever? I'm happy they put a stop sign up. You know, like, you get, honestly, the possibilities are unlimited. So invitation, it doesn't have to be like a sit-down dinner with salad forks. And sometimes I think we put that pressure on ourselves when we are thinking of inviting someone over. We put that pressure of an invitation where it has to be like a formal sit-down dinner, and that feels awkward. It could be something literally as simple as, I was at Kroger, they had popsicles on sale, do you and your kids want some? I mean, it can be something that's so simple. It could even be that, you know, like, you see them out playing with their kids and you take them over and just be like, they had pop ice on sale. Do you all want some? You might even learn that there's an allergy to, something, or a nut allergy or red dye or whatever. Okay, well now you know in the future. You kind of log that in your neighbor Dewey Decimal System where you're like, I will now know that this is not something that they need, but this is something that I could do, and I'm being mindful of that. When you are mindful of someone's child's need, whatever that might be, let's just use like a nut allergy. It is so meaningful to them. It is so meaningful that you have recognized that this is something that's important. So use that. One of my neighbors, Octavio, he's from Mexico, and he served on the, I don't know if this is the right way to say it, the Mexican police force. I don't know if that's the right way to say that. But he lives in our neighborhood, and he is always cooking outside, and it smells amazing. And so I was walking in the park, and I was like, Octavio, like I yelled. And I was like, what are you fixing? And, he was like, tacos. And I was like, I want one. And so he was like, okay. And so like he brought a taco over, and then we just stood at the fence. And he also makes, I have no idea what the name of it is. I also want to pause and say this could be how serial killers work. He also was like, I made this drink it, and I did. But he sells this Mexican drink that's like a fruit punch type thing, and it has like a cream base, and I forget, maybe you all know what the name of it is. I don't know, but it has like papaya in it and cantaloupe and all of this stuff, and it tasted amazing. It has like coconut, and it was so good. And so, we just stood at the fence, and I'm like dripping taco down, and just like, how long have you cooked, and have you always been someone that cooked in your family? And it's like, just don't be afraid to just be like, those burgers smell great. Just like shout out to your neighbor and say something like that. It's okay, I don't find that weird. What you're doing is you're finding that connection. And I think that we've gotten so used to just being like, this is what society is supposed to expect of me, and I'm so prim and proper that I'm not gonna just shout out, I want a taco. And, he could have said no, but he said yes. And so we just, it was really sweet. Also, look for areas where you can have a celebration. Maybe they got a new dog and you saw them with a puppy. It could be something like they had a graduation sign out, and their kid just graduated from whatever grade, because that happens more often on grades, not just high school anymore. It could be something like you're like, oh, it's the beginning of summer. Also, they say be a hype man. Have you all heard that phrase before? You're someone's hype man. You're going out and you're building that person up, and this person's, we need to be like hype girls with each other. We need to be like, you got bangs. I'm so excited. And, it could be something that's so silly like that, but it is a connection. And we know the commitment that bangs are. And, we also know the trauma when you're like, I shouldn't have done that, right after you do it. So just be that hype girl. Being friendly doesn't mean being formal. It just means being friendly. Just be yourself with your neighbor. Having awareness. So you're building that connectedness with awareness. Leah Snyder had shared on her Facebook maybe like a month ago that she was out mowing and had a migraine and got super overheated, and her face got really red, and her neighbor came over, and she said that her neighbors are even older than her, but they came over and they were like, are you feeling okay? And she was like, oh, I have this terrible migraine, and I think I just got overheated and I feel sick. And they were like, we'll finish mowing your grass for you. And, she, at first, again, it's like that giving and receiving. Oh, no, I've got it. Now, Rick was, and still sort of is, on the mend from everything that he's been going through. So, it was either going to be Leah or them. And so she really had to go, I'm going to allow them to do this. And I just thought that there was like such sweetness in that acceptance of saying thank you. But now, even though it's not a payback thing, do you think that Leah now is like going to have a tighter connection with that neighbor to be like, hey, I made some banana bread, or I made whatever. I sure appreciate like you mowing my grass for me, and feel free to do it again if you want to, you know. But, you know, it's like now they've built like a tight, because they're newer to that neighborhood. They're building tighter bonds with their neighbors. And you could go over and just be like, hey, I'm just checking in. I haven't seen you. You know, but there's nothing weird about that. Like, who doesn't want to feel loved? And if they don't answer the door, no biggie. At least you tried. Availability. That's another way to build connectedness. If you're always busy with you, how will you have time for them? So if you're just always busy with you and the needs of your own family or your kids or whatever it is, how will you have time for them? So James, let's turn to James 2, 4 through 17. So James 2, 4 through 17. I'm going to start reading, unless Faith wants to. Yeah. She brought a honey bun earlier, and so I was like, I want to eat that honey bun, and so her payback is I'm going to ask if she wants to read every time. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself is not accompanied by action is dead. So John 13:35. By this all people will know you are my disciples if you have love for one another. So how do you invite your neighbors into the life of this church? How do you invite church members into the life of your neighborhood so that you can bear witness to Christ together? So that means you're going to have people from your church inviting them into your neighborhood, whether it's from your community group or not, but you're also inviting your neighbors into church life. And so what does that look like? So this goes back to that book, Blessed, that I was telling you about. And I could not get that to work out better, so I know that's like a little spread out. But bless actually has the meaning in this book, the 5 everyday ways to love your neighbor and change the world. So the 5 ways is begin with prayer. So you're going to look at the map that you filled out. If you haven't filled it out, definitely fill it out. If you don't know what I'm talking about, ask yourself, who lives beside me? You know, east, west, east. I developed a lisp. East, west, north, south. You know, wherever you live, if it's in the country, you know, who lives around you. So you're going to begin with prayer. Look at that map or think of those people. Who are the people you're praying for? The next thing, listen. Ask listening questions. I mean, don't be a weirdo and pry, but you can still ask those listening questions. Let that conversation just flow naturally. Bless your neighbor with a listening ear. People are so used to people not pausing to listen. You know, they ask the question to ask the question, but they don't really ask it to receive the answer. So really make sure that you're asking and you're being engaged in listening. So eat. Institute a meal dessert calendar. It's summer. This couldn't be easier than ever in summer to institute something like that. Bless a neighbor with a summer snack. That could be something like watermelon. I mean, you could just be like, oh, I just got an extra watermelon, or, you know, we were having a family thing and, you know, we had this left over. If y'all have seen Dirty Dancing, I carried a watermelon. You know, carry a watermelon over to do you remember that phrase from that movie? I thought it was so funny. But carry that watermelon over there and just be like, you know, hey, I just got this, you know, would you be interested, or whatever it is. Daniel and I don't grow things. And my dad gave us a little watermelon plant, and it was prolific. And we ended up with 8 of those giant watermelons. But the problem is they all ripen at the same time. And 2 people can only eat so much watermelon before you have like a negative reaction. And so, we really had to look for ways that we could give away watermelon because we were like, we can't get through all of this watermelon. So, it is funny how you can plan something and then it just gives you this opportunity. So you all can plant watermelon right now and then have it by, like August, September. And it's a great way to like go over to your neighbor. So the last thing is, serve. How can you serve those around you? I'm not sure if anyone in here went to Molly's house, but a bunch of people showed up to help her with some yard work. And that was like I think, Kathy, were you there?
No, it was Karen.
Oh, okay. And so they all went over there to be like, we're going to help Molly and, do whatever. We're going to pull weeds, we're going to mulch, we're going to landscape, we're going to help her with some of these things. So you could even use, while your community group is not meeting during summer, you could even use that group from your community group to say, hey, I have a neighbor over here, I've arranged with them, could you come and do this? You could even ask yourself for your family, like Kelly. You have a close-knit family. You have a lot of family members. You have a lot of young kids that need that example and that modeling of what it is to sacrifice what you want to do on a hot day for helping somebody else. And so when you're trying to figure out how would I serve someone else, it's going to come down to it's RPMS, and I think it's funny that PMS is in there, but it's RPMS: relational, physical, mental, and spiritual. So when you're thinking, how can I serve my neighbor? Relational, physical, mental, and spiritual. And these things are going to kind of illuminate ways that you could help your neighbor. Physical ones are always going to be the easiest ones because you can see them. You can see when your neighbor has like a boot on her leg and she's trying to mow her own grass. You can see when, I haven't seen them in a while. Or you can see, I think something terrible happened. There's a lot of cars at their house and everyone's dressed in black. Or, they have a baby sign that's outside, welcoming a new baby. Like the physical one is always going to be the easiest. And the other ones really are going to require a little bit more of a relationship to understand those, but it's got to start somewhere. So the last one is a story. What is your 3-part story? And so you're like, well, what is that? Good question. So your 3-part story is, what was my life before Jesus? I mean, for some of you, that might be hard because you're like, well, I was 7 and so my mom did everything, and that's going to it's going to look a little different. For some of you, maybe you were 37. I was someone that grew up most of my life thinking I was saved at 12, and I wasn't. I just knew who God was and did all the things, Sunday school, youth group, just all the things. At church, every time it was open, and it really wasn't until I went to Haiti where I was like, oh, no. I just knew who he was, or not that I have a relationship with him. And so this is going to look different for a lot of people. The point is you're getting serious. What was the point where you got serious about following Christ and you let him be Lord of your life? So think in those terms. How did you meet Christ? How did you become a Christ follower? Did you go through something hard and that led you to God? Because that can lead people to God just strictly out of rock bottom desperation. Did a friend or coworker invite you to church? Did an experience inspire you to get serious about your life, to Jesus? Sometimes people read a book and it's like a game changer for them. And the third thing, what difference has following Jesus made in my life? How has knowing him impacted how you walk through good and bad times in your life? So what I want you all to do is find the person next to you. That might mean that, however this works, you might have to move. And what I want you all to do, you don't need to nail this right now, but you all need to have these answers ready to share for when they come up. And I'm sure some of you all feel wildly uncomfortable, but this is a safe space. And if you don't feel comfortable with people that you're familiar with or even know, you absolutely aren't going to share this with your neighbor, because you're going to jump out of your skin and just not be willing to share with them. So find your person, like go ahead and scooch over. What I want you all to do, like that might mean that, like, you know, Roxanne, like, and however that works out, but take 5 minutes for each person. At the 5-minute mark, I'll tell you all to switch and answer those 3 questions to each other. So go ahead and find your person. 5 minutes for each person. For some of you, if you have like 3 people in the group, be like super concise and then like move on to the next person. If you're in a group of 2, go ahead and switch to the next person. Okay, it's okay. do it. No, I think that's interesting. I also think that it's interesting the dynamic of family members that you're like, it can feel harder to just be like, I'm going to say this to my mom. Right.
Well, she's like, you already know. I said, but do I don't know that.
Right.
So,
Right.
mine's very similar to your story.
Right. Right. Yeah.
When I actually hit that realization.
Yeah, it's like you go to camp, you think.
I didn't. I wasn't raised in church. You know, we had just started going to church actually.
Yeah.
Around that age. So it's funny. Look back on it, you're like, things changed really differently when I made that realization.
Well, it's so different as an adult because now, like, you look back in having, I say money because, you don't have money when you're 7, but, when it's an adult, you look at the financial choices you made, you look at the people you ran with, the conversations you were part of, the outfits you wore, like whatever it is, because you could do whatever because you were an adult. So it's just different.
But I love this because the neighbor we had when we first moved in, and we didn't have a mailbox across the street. He was from Iran or Iraq, somewhere in that area. And he immediately asked Ron, what are your religious beliefs and stuff? And how Ron is. He said they fled their country because of the Muslims and the Christians.
Okay. So,
It's a great conversation.
right, because now you're like, oh, they might be afraid of me.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that developed into a sweet relationship, and he ended up having a brain tumor, and he passed several years ago. But we have taken care of his widow ever since. One day, she had Thanksgiving, she has no family, no children, nobody left. She has a house she has in Lexington. And not too long ago, we kept an eye on her house because sometimes she would stay in Lexington. She has a boyfriend who's so cute. And she came home one day and she says, Mom, is everything okay with Miss Janet? And I'm like, I honestly haven't seen her over there, but she may be staying in Lexington. The police and the fire department, everybody was getting ready to bust her door down because of a well check, because the mailman had noticed her mail.
Oh, yeah. Right.
And I'm right over there going, she's okay, I got her on the phone.
Yeah.
So they had to talk to her, but, I said, maybe we'll get her again.
But it takes someone to notice.
Yes.
Whether it's the postman or you, right.
Of course, he still mows the grass, and she insists on paying him. And
Yeah. Right. Right.
That's kind of how this started, was with this conversation.
Yeah. That's sweet. Nice. But it's sweet because it shows Addie like that act of service, even in the smallest way, that it's like you're helping her by bringing her mail to her.
She came and picked up her mail one day, and Addie hugged her and everything.
Yeah.
Addie never met her.
Yeah.
But she's like, we go get your mail every day.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm going to argue that she's probably going to remember that for the rest of her life. Yeah.
I remember when I grew up at my granny's house in Lexington.
Yeah.
There was the older couple. So she sat on the porch downtown Lexington. I will never
How fun is that? Yeah. That's fun. Okay, we're gonna get restarted. You all wrap up what. So, did anybody learn anything new? I mean, something that I will say, just standing from this observational point, it was interesting because I saw tears. So obviously someone felt emotional about this, answering these, which is like really sweet. I heard multiple people in this room say, now what was your name again? And that's great. But that's great. I mean, I feel that way every Sunday. I'm like, I don't know half these people. And so, it's so nice to be able to just even have that connection in here. It's a mother and daughter saying, I just learned something I didn't know. And I think that that's nice to be able to hear that. And sometimes it can be really challenging to answer those questions with loved ones or, really close friends, because you are being very vulnerable in those things. So we have to be intentional in the way we use our minutes, our mouths, and our mortgages. Our hey neighbor could encourage a fellow believer, but it also could start a beautiful work that God could do in their heart in the life of our neighbor. It can start with a simple hey neighbor, but Jesus will finish what he started. But you need to walk over there and say something, whatever it is, or grab their mail and take their mail in for them because they're elderly. And they might be like, get off my porch. Okay, now. But you might realize they don't like that. So it doesn't have to be complicated, but it does have to be on purpose. And that's the big thing, is I think we get it in our minds that it has to be Instagram worthy, where it has to be like the fanciest and formal and all this stuff. And we overcomplicate it instead of just being like, well, how do kids become friends? Kids walk up and they're like, I like yellow. And then they're like, we're now friends. What's your name? And so it's like we have to really just go back to those basics of making it simple. So the areas of focus for week 4, what is an area where a neighbor could help you? So identify that. In thinking of your neighbors that you've been praying for, what's an area where you think you could ask one of them as appropriate, not asking them, will you come over and mow my grass for me? Not that, but how they could kind of step into, naturally kind of step into your life and your rhythms. So how will you bless, using that model from before, your neighbor or neighborhood this summer? So using that, obviously you all can go back on the Buck Run app or YouTube or whatever and write down bless if you all didn't before, but how will you do that? How will you build community with your neighbor? What does that look like? And again, it's hard to describe because it's a feeling, it's a sense of community. So how are you going to build that with them? It normally comes down to the simplest things of, offering to check somebody's mail or asking them to check your mail, or just really super simple things, or, walking over and just being like, hey, Alan, I heard you're really great at painting. Any tips do you have? Why can't I do edging? Or, it could be, Ron, I can't figure out how to get this weed eater, fed through the thing. Could you help me with that? Or it could be the simplest things. We don't need to overcomplicate it. We're going to go back to the thing that from the first 2 classes of making sure that we're continuing to read and memorize Romans 12, 9 through 21. And we've got 2 more weeks to read it daily, so it's not too late to get started on that, but just really challenge yourself to go that step further and really memorize it, and include your family, your kids. You've got a lot of young kids in and around you, in the house, and, cousins, and, there's a lot. Have them write it down. Have them sit down and just write it out. Who cares if it's in colored marker or crayons or whatever it is, but have them sit down with them. I mean, kids love it when you sit down with a marker with them to sit down and do this, and just write it out with them. So definitely include them in that. So sometimes the offered coffee or accepting help can really reveal self-reliance is still lingering in our hearts. And so we need to make sure that if we really feel that little sense of, ooh, I'm having a hard time accepting that or whatever, what that is that self-reliance? Is that ego? Is that pride? Self-sufficiency at the heart level is a rejection of God's provision. And so if we're feeling something like that, we definitely need to ask the Lord to help us with that. Trust that the Father will give us all that we need and all that is good. Humble ourselves before Him and acknowledge our need for His provision. Reminding ourselves of the greatest need every day will help you walk across your yard or down the street to share God's love. If you don't see yourselves as needy, the gift of the gospel won't be a treasure to you. So you need to make sure that you're like, wait, I need this. I need this every hour. I need it every minute. I need it every day. I'm needy and I need these things. Matthew 5:3, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So let's go to the Lord in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you so much for allowing us to gather and worship you. And Lord, teach us to be good neighbors, not just those who live nearby, but to really everyone that we meet. We want to make sure that we're good neighbors to the people that we work with, that sit next to us, wherever we are. I pray we see the best in and want what's best for people, and that's you. We want them to see you. We want them to feel your love. Bless the givers in this room. Keep our eyes open for those that need encouragement, support, that need time, that need love. Bless those who step out in giving and those who will graciously receive. You are our treasure. May we hold on to things of this world loosely, but hold on to you tightly and to your word tightly. All I am and all I have, I offer to you, Lord. In your name I pray. Amen.